The investigation into a local man's death more than 28 years ago. Scott Johnson was living in Sydney, Australia with his partner when his naked body was found at the bottom of a beachside cliff. His clothes were folded at the top, and police quickly decided it was a suicide. But the finding didn't sit right with Scott's brother Steve, especially after he learned in 2005 that there were at least 3 other cases of gay men who died at cliffsides around Sydney in the 80s, and that the area had a history of gangs attacking gay men. That's when Steve started looking into things himself, and he pushed investigators to reopen the case into his brother's death. In 2012, the suicide determination was overturned, and the cause of Scott's death was changed to, quote, open finding. Since then, several other families have come forward with similar stories. Many of them, including Scott's, are chronicled in a documentary that came out last year. It's called Deep Water.
Everyone knew about it. The remarkable thing about the Scott Johnson death is that this denial that North Head, particularly Bluefish Point, where the incident happened, wasn't a gay beat. What a load of bullshit. They failed to look at local incidents. And there have been incidents up and down the northern beaches involving assaults on gay men for years.
In 2015, for just the second time in Australia's history, a third investigation was launched into Scott's death. I'm joined now by Scott's brother, Steve Johnson. Steve, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Along with former Attorney General, now partner at Foley Hoag, Martha Coakley, who traveled to Australia last month as part of what's been named Team Scott, the group fighting for the real story behind his death. Martha, it's good to see you,
good
too.
To see you, Jim.
Steve, before 2005, when these news reports came out about gay baiting and killing and this, you weren't buying the suicide thing anyway. Why didn't you believe that?
Well, the day Scott's body was found, a couple of days earlier than that, was the last time he had a conversation with somebody that we knew of, and it was with his professor, who had told him he had just finished the final proof in a math PhD that he was working on. So to our mind, his friends and me, it was a day for celebration, not a day for suicide.
So are the local cops, are they inept, or are they anti-gay, or is there a cover-up? What's your analysis of why this has gone wrong for so long?
That's a pretty good question.
That you don't want to answer, or you don't think you know the answer to?
Well, let's say that as the news came to light in 2005 that there were at least 3 other cliffside deaths that the police had called suicide and told the families no suspicious circumstances, and it was concluded in an inquest in 2005 that those were actually murders. And I launched an investigation since the police still didn't want to touch Scott's case, and it was clear that there were dozens and dozens of gay men who had died. Some of the cases had been solved, but a few dozen cases had not been solved.
So they had to know this. So what's the agenda?
The
CYA, or I mean, what is the deal here?
It's not clear why it was that they just picked up my brother's body and turned to us and said, suicide, no suspicious circumstances, have a nice day.
How did you get involved in this?
Well, our firm agreed to help with some documents, with so many documents over all these years, and I got more engaged with my background. Certainly, it didn't seem right to me that it was dismissed early on as a suicide. I could understand maybe incompetence, indifference, marginal victims, whatever, police bias around gay deaths, but then it became, over the period of time more recently, real resistance to relooking at this. And so we don't know. Maybe it's individuals who are involved, who are taking payments. You know, that's all to be determined. But my interest was wedded in not just, you know, justice for Scott, but what's happening for all these other families in Australia, for people whose murders, if they were just dismissed.
Why does this matter to you? I mean, I know you love your brother. I've read a lot about this. I know you care deeply about him, but he's not coming back. Well, why does it matter so much to you to find out what really happened?
Well, Scott certainly deserved to be protected, and he deserved justice for the police to act once he had been killed. The fact that he was ignored, and today there are so many other families who similarly would like answers and justice for their loved ones. I think this case, Scott's case, has attracted a lot of attention, and hopefully it'll shine a light on the other cases as well.
His former lover originally agreed, if I get this right, that it was not suicide, and now he's, at least from what I've read, open to that notion. Is there any piece of you that says at the end of this process, which, assuming it's fairer and more thorough, that you may end up where you started, that your brother killed himself? Do you entertain that notion at all, or no?
It's always possible. I think it's possible for anyone to consider suicide and to actually take their own life. The fact that once the other cases where the victims were killed at gay meeting places called gay beats opened the question whether this was a gay beat where Scott died, and it turns out it was, and it turns out there was plenty of violence in that neighborhood all over town, assaults against gay men and some killings. The likelihood that he went to this gay meeting place to kill himself is very, very remote.
You know, you were, I was about to tell you, you were the Attorney General. You knew you were the Attorney General. You're the Middlesex County DA before that. How hard is it so many years after the fact, especially thousands of miles away? And I know you're willing to spend the money and the person power, and you're involved. How hard is it to ever get to the bottom of something so old like this?
Well, interestingly, it's very hard. But in this case, we had in this last coroner's inquest officers still in uniform who were at the scene.
Really?
It's amazing how many people still were around who have information because, however, it was labeled as suicide, the investigation, the autopsy, nothing was done that should have been done and could have been done, and that's the point. We'd like to know what the answer is, and the police didn't do it.
How hard is this to talk about your brother? I mean, this is horrible. How hard is this, even so many years after the fact?
Sitting through the opening of the inquest, these first 4 days, where we heard from Scott's professor, who was the last one who taught to him, Scott's friends, who all expressed surprise and shock, and the police who couldn't think of anything that they could have done differently, which was shocking in itself, since they didn't do anything, was very, very hard, very emotional. The fact that we're making progress and that there are persons of interest, the stage that we're entering now, for the next 6 months, the coroner is going to be overseeing an investigation of a long list of persons of interest that still live in the neighborhood. We think there's hope.
Do you worry at all? I mean, that old Peggy Lee song, is that all there is? Do you worry that at the end of this thing, even if you find you achieve justice and Martha and the rest of your team get where you want to, that you may say the journey was not worth the wait, or are you convinced this is where you need to go?
The journey has already been worth the work. The time has been extraordinary, so it's been almost 30 years. The fact that now we have this documentary that is chronicling this very grim period that the police have still not acknowledged is attracting a lot of attention. This is a time in Australia where the gay community is fighting for equality, and this is helping a dialogue that's very healthy.
Great. I wish you a lot of luck. It's good to meet you. Thank you, Martha. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Jim,
Lots
as
of luck
always.
to you
Thank
as
you.
well. If you'd like to see the documentary Deepwater, it's being screened at Harvard Kennedy's Carr Center on Tuesday, January 24th at 6:30, followed by a discussion. The event is free and open to the public.